Well, good evening, everyone, from Chongqing, China here. Time check is 9:05 p.m. in the beautiful city of Chongqing. And welcome to our viewers tonight. Boy, oh boy, do we have a lot to unpack this evening. And I'm pretty sure you guys are aware of the lineup tonight. Of course, we bring in Cyrus Janssen. Thank you for joining tonight's program, Cyrus. Greatly appreciated for you to join us all the way from North America. It must be a little bit early there, but no problem, right?
It's good to be here. Absolutely, Alex. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks so much. And Brian Berletic from the New Atlas. Welcome to the program, Brian. Thank you very much for joining us this Monday evening here in Southeast Asia from where you're located. And we have also a new guest to the program, Merkel. Hello, Merkel. Thank you for joining today's program. We appreciate that.
Awesome to be here, Alex.
Fantastic. Well, we have a lot to unpack today. I just wanted to go over a couple of headlines that are really grabbing everyone's attention worldwide here. And one of them is the financial markets in Europe and the United States. As we know that SVB Bank, which is located in the western part of the United States, well, it went to the wall, as we call it, and had to be saved. And it looks like there isn't a buyer, but for the UK entity, there was a buyer. I believe it was HSBC that came in to save the day there, but pretty much wiping out any equity on that. But let's really move forward to what this program all about tonight, and that is the Ukraine. I'm going to pass the mic over to Cyrus, and maybe, Cyrus, you can set the tone for today's discussion. Now, before we get into that, I just want to let everybody know that a healthy debate is what we're all about here on the Let's Talk China show. We invite guests that maybe don't necessarily always agree with everyone on the panel, but I think that is healthy. And that is a way for all of us to learn. And of course, you, the viewer, you get to say your say in the comment box on the side there. Now, don't forget to subscribe to everyone's channel here. They're all in the description below. And throughout the program, if you would like to do a donation or anything like that for super chats, we will bring those up later in the program. Let's bring Cyrus onto the panel. And Cyrus, we had this discussion about this show here a couple of weeks ago. And it was you that said, you know, maybe we have to take this a little bit different and bring maybe invite someone onto the show that may have a different opinion from a few of us.
Yeah, absolutely, Alex. I mean, like you said, I think a healthy debate is always needed. And, you know, earlier this week, I actually had the opportunity to go on the Piers Morgan show in the UK. And it was a very amazing experience for me because I was very happy with Piers because he was very open-minded. He essentially played a very neutral position, but he brought in two sides. And we were discussing the potential TikTok ban in the United States. And I was, you know, given a platform to speak my opinions about TikTok and China. And, you know, I was debating, you know, a member from the Conservative Party in the UK who obviously had a very different approach to TikTok and China. But we had a good conversation, and there was actually something that Piers actually learned from that. So very similar, you know. So I'm very happy to be joined by Mirko today. You know, he's someone that I've connected with on LinkedIn. You know, we've interacted a lot of times over the last few months on LinkedIn. Mirko's very experienced. He has over 23 years of experience in China. Obviously speaks Chinese. You know, very established expat entrepreneur. I believe he has 3 law degrees, so very well spoken, very articulate, and he has certainly a different opinion of the matter. And I think for my main goal right now is, as we're looking at this, is, you know, as an American citizen, you know, we're looking at a very complicated matter for the United States being involved in this war. I mean, we're looking at a potential conflict that doesn't have an end date. And this is very concerning for me because, in my opinion, what we need to be doing is we need to be shifting the focus right now to really how do we end this war and how do we find a pathway forward? How do we find peace? That's my biggest kind of shift. And that's kind of the stance that I'm taking right now. I think Mirko, I think Brian might have different stances, but I figured, you know what, why don't we bring all of us together? We can all kind of present our views. We can talk about the war in Russia and Ukraine, and you know, we can discuss this and have a healthy debate. So that's kind of the premise there, and I wanted to introduce Mirko. So thank you so much, Alex. I'm looking forward to today's show.
Great. So let's bring Merkel onto the panel here, and once we're done getting a couple of comments from Mirko. We'll bring Brian on as well, and then we will shift into the discussion. We'll get into it in more detail. Mirko, maybe tell us a bit about yourself. I know Cyrus has recommended that you'd be great for this type of show. Maybe you could let us know a little bit about yourself, and so our viewers can understand what standpoint maybe that you're coming from.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Alex, and for the kind intro, Cyrus, because we've been sort of sparring on LinkedIn on some of these topics, and often have different viewpoints. But I think this sort of upfront, totally subscribe to the idea that in the end of the day, it's all about learning about the other perspective, right? And just to be very sort of humble going into any of these kind of debates. And also, I'm not an expert on Russia or Ukraine at all. For me, I think it's more the perspective of someone who spent a long time in China and just recently having moved back and sort of getting a bit more in tune with how Germans feel about this. And so, as Cyrus said, I spent 23 years in China. I'm a lawyer by training, studied in Germany, in China, in Nanjing, have a law degree from the US as well, and practiced for a few years, have a number of startups under my belt. And currently I'm managing a China-focused technology investment fund. So we're investing in listed entities, be it on the mainland A shares or Hong Kong shares or ADRs in the US, but they have to be sort of technology and digitally driven businesses for us to invest in them and make them part of our portfolio. But that's kind of like my day job. And the part of the job really is to sort of read a lot about what's going on. And I think I have a certain perspective on the war in the Ukraine, but also interestingly, and I think this is where Cyrus and me met a couple of times, is how China has positioned itself. And maybe this is also part of the conversation here today.
Well, thank you for that. And if we could bring Brian, maybe Brian, you can explain to our panel a little bit about yourself. I already know you, and we've had a few live streams, but also admire what you've done to the New Atlas channel here with explosive growth over the last 6 months. There must be a reason for that. Maybe you could share it with our audience.
Well, again, thank you for having me. It's great to see Alex and Cyrus, and it's nice to meet Mirko. And my backgrounds, I was a U.S. Marine. I was an electro-optical ordnance repairman. I worked on a lot of the advanced weapons that we see being sent to Ukraine right now. And then I got out of the U.S. Marine Corps. I spent most of my time in Asia. And I moved to Asia after getting out of the Marine Corps. And I've been here basically my entire adult life. And for the last 10 years, I've been doing geopolitical analysis and specifically focusing on U.S. wars of aggression and U.S. political interference around the globe.
Well, thank you for sharing that with Brian. So let me pose a question to Mirko to get things rolling here a little bit. You said that you're back in Germany, correct? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm in Munich,
sure,
in the Bavarian Alps.
So, I mean, what's the mood in Germany regarding the funding of this war? What's your thoughts on how the average German, or maybe how you feel about this ongoing conflict that has been going on for well over, I guess, 13 months now?
Yeah, so I dare not speak on behalf of the sort of the German population. Obviously, as you can see from the media, it's quite divided now, right? There is a growing peace movement, sort of on the left as well as on the far right, which is sort of the former Communist Party, but then also the AfD, Alternative for Germany, more like a right-wing party, if you like. And but at the same time, and I was just saying this to Cyrus the other day. My wife, she's Chinese. She's taking German classes. They provided here to foreigners that come into the country. And in her class, there are like 13 students. She's the only Chinese. All of the other ones are Ukrainians that have moved from Ukraine, basically refugees. She can actually pick up on quite a bit what's going on in their apartments because they are video classes on Zoom or on Teams, if I remember correctly. And so it gets a little bit of a social view into the living room, if you like, how they live there with their kids. The grandparents, mostly, there are no men around. They're all back in the home country fighting the war. And I think the difficulty in sort of coming to a conclusion here is that what we can see as Germans is that the Ukrainians want to defend their fatherland, their motherland, and they're willing to fight regardless of how much support they become. And for me, very often going through the newspaper articles, it sounds like the West needs to accept China's peace plan, or the West needs to do this or that. And very little is being said about what the Ukrainians feel, what they want, and what their decisions are. And I think this needs to be sort of added into the spectrum of opinions. And I think this is one of sort of my major concerns going through the news articles these days.
Right. You mentioned, China's attempt at bringing some peace there. Let me ask you a question from myself. When do you feel this conflict actually started? What was the start date for you?
I would say 1991 is really sort of the beginning. I think that's also how China looks at that, the disintegration of the former Soviet Union. Obviously, 2014 was yet another one. Then with the Minsk agreements, that's how far. And like everybody listening to Mearsheimer, we have our own Mearsheimer here in Germany. I'm not sure you're aware of her. She used to be a journalist for German public television, ARD. Gabriele Krone-Schmalz is her name. And she is, very, very articulate when it comes to sort of Russian history and Soviet Union history. She's lived in Moscow for a long time, but she has a very difficult standing these days with the kind of stuff that she's saying, which is going back all the way to 91, 2014, and how all of that is just not as easy to sort of blame it entirely 100% on Russia.
Yeah, I mean, we could go back in, 100 years if we wanted to, but let's to you. Let me really hammer a date down to you. Do you feel this conflict was a highlight, what you're basing a lot of your feelings and thoughts on, February 2022 or, 2014, 2015? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's more, for me, again, I would say it's 1991, but this is really, right. I'm saying this with regard to the Russian psyche, like the emotional life of the Russian leadership and the Russian people. So that's why I would say 1991. But that's going back a long way. 2014 definitely was a milestone, right? And since then it's just been going downhill for the last nine years, really.
Right. Let's talk about this Minsk agreement here for a moment. Well, we're bringing up one of the slides here. The leaders of Belarus, Russia, Germany, France, and Ukraine at the 11th to 12th February 2015 summit in Minsk, Belarus. Have you looked over that agreement before? Have you read it?
Never. No, not at all.
Well, I think it might be a good time that we'll bring it up tonight a little bit on the program, but I'm going to pass it over to Brian and just see what Brian's thoughts are on maybe when did you think that this start date happened between these two countries in a conflict. Brian, give us your insight, please.
Well, actually, I agree with Mirko. I think it started in 1991 when Ukraine got its supposed independence, and immediately the United States descended upon it, meddling in its internal political affairs. Victoria Nuland, in her capacity at the U.S. State Department, admitted that the United States, since 1991, has poured billions of dollars into Ukraine's internal political affairs, and that's just there's no way to look at it other than political interference and interfering and influencing Ukraine's political sphere. And what they were doing was shaping Ukraine into a proxy that they could use against the Russian Federation that emerged out of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And this was a process that went on for years and years. There was the 2004 protests that the U.S. admittedly engineered and was behind. And I have a Guardian article right here that admits that it was the U.S. involved there. in an attempt to overthrow the government of Belarus, Serbia, overthrowing the government of Serbia, and Georgia between 2000 and 2004. And then they did it again in 2014. They removed an elected government. Whatever you want to think about that government, it was elected. It was the illegal government of Ukraine at the time. And the U.S. was, again, caught interfering, handpicking the client regime that would replace it. It was an extremist regime, anti-Russian, and that was the whole point, was to take Ukraine, its people, and its resources and shape it into a battering ram to use against Russia. And all while this is happening, we have to remember that NATO continuously expanded all the way up to Russia's border, and especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And also, while all of that was taking place, the United States and other major NATO powers, they were invading one nation after the other, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria. So they're meddling, they're invading, they're occupying, Syria being an ally of Russia. And if you put all of this together, what you see taking place is the United States encircling Russia. And if they are invading, occupying, destroying, overthrowing the governments all around Russia, what is Russia supposed to think about what America and NATO's intentions are for Russia itself? And they don't have to imagine, because the U.S. and their policy papers over many years, transcending presidential administrations, have said, we're going to make one whole Europe, and Russia is going to be subordinated into it, under it. So this is what Russia is reacting to. And I think that is very important to understand all of this background information when trying to understand why Russia did what it did in 2014, and then again in 2022.
Okay, let's bring up the panel here, Gawe, if possible. Mirko, this is over to you. Brian is stating that NATO, Americans had a plan. They had a plan all along since 1991 to weaken Russia. Do we blame Russia for this conflict that's going on right now? Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good points, Brian. I think most of it is, I guess, true. I'm not here as the token German defending the Americans. That's not what I want to do. I think what's important to look at is the sort of emotional and psychological state of Eastern Europe. Yeah, with the Soviet Union legacy ever since the end of the Second World War. I mean, I myself, funnily enough, I think I mentioned this to Cyrus the other day. Yeah. I was born in East Germany, so my first foreign language since 5th grade, I think, was Russian. Right, so until I think I went to the US to study, my Russian was always better than my English, actually. And so our first class trip even was to a border city back in Soviet Union in 1988 in Brest, which was the city, of course, in history, Brest-Litovsk, where they signed the peace treaty. And I remember this very clearly because, East Germany was totally aligned with Soviet Union, not so much with China. I didn't really know much about China when I was in school. It was not really a topic. But Soviet Union obviously was. And if you look at all these former Soviet Union republics and also other Eastern European countries, you have a very strong historical anti-Russian sentiment because of all the things that have happened there in the past. So I think what the US is doing there, I guess that's terrible. That's meddling, influencing, all of that. But I think we also have to look at what kind of soil, what kind of ground this is falling. And I think it's very fertile because Russia, especially since it disintegrated in 1991, has been on a special path as well in these countries. From what I'm hearing from Polish friends, I have a friend I'm playing tennis with, a Czech guy. This is very, very much anti-Russian. It's got nothing to do with the influence of the US. That's just historical experience being sort of passed down from the grandparents from the war. And this is how these countries feel about it.
You mentioned about Russia, that there was a lot of anger towards Russians. And what do you mean by that?
Oh, you don't know about this, Alex? I mean, the feeling of sort of the Polish, the Czech, the Hungarians of what happened in the 50s and the 60s, the influencing the Warsaw Pact, how these Eastern European countries were treated, and also even like still the end of the Second World War. There's a lot of historical legacy. My grandma kept telling me about how afraid she was of the Russians coming in and raping the women in town. And this stuff is still alive, right? I mean, this is still there, and there's a lot of fear there. But I don't think I'm the one who can tell this story best. It's just something that I remember from being very little, and then having sort of done trips to Czechoslovakia, as it was called back then, and to Hungary and to Poland, because we were not allowed to go to Western Europe, right, as East Germans. So our holidays we spent in Hungary and in Prague and in Poland and Krakow, and so we know these people there and how they feel about the Russians, and I think this is something that's happened there.
That's interesting. I mean, I've been married to a Lithuanian wife for 20 years, and Kaliningrad is part of Russia, which is bordering Lithuania, which is Eastern Europe, as Eastern Europe can be. Her mom and my wife were born during the Soviet Union as well. And it's interesting that, both you and I have a pretty different dynamic on our view on Russia. And I just want to share with you, as we know that there was a lot of sacrifices during these wars. I mean, if you're going to go back 30, 40 years or 50 years or even 60 years, I mean, 27 million people in the Soviet Union did lose their lives fighting for some cause. And to say that, and a lot of those were Russians as well, to say that to put this entire nation under the spotlight, I think we have to look at what was going on in the world at that time. A lot of crazy things were going on in that world. We may be able to throw mud on the Russians. We may be able to throw mud on the Germans and many ethnics. But the thing that the thing that I want to really focus here is that you say that a lot of this fear is from Russia, but this country has not really done much to Europe here in the last couple of decades, to my understanding. I'm going to pass this over to Brian. And Brian, I think I would like your take on this, please.
Well, I just want to kind of point out why Russia was in all of these places, including East Germany in the first place, because Nazi Germany invaded Russia. They lost the war, and that's what brought Russians westward. So whatever was going on, just like Alex is kind of trying to say, whatever happened during the Soviet Union, that was the Soviet Union, and those days are over, long over, decades ago. And I just want to go back to this point about the United States interfering in the internal political affairs of all of Europe, but especially Eastern Europe. A lot of these groups that are, there's not all of them, not to paint them all with the same brush, but there are groups who can trace their ideological ancestry, so to speak, back to the Nazi collaborators in each one of these countries, including Ukraine, including Belarus, including many of these Eastern European countries. And the United States, since the end of World War II, was investing in these groups, keeping them around. They're around even to this day. That's no accident. So they were investing money into these people through media, through political programs, arming them. They're still being armed and backed, and their message spread with the help of the United States to this very day. And so when we talk about resentment to Russia, how much of that can we say is genuine? I mean, we're talking decades ago from Soviet times. Now we're several decades past that. Why does this persist? Is it just people handing it down to their children, or is this because the media in Eastern Europe, because of extensive U.S. funding, promotes this because it serves U.S. interests? And I don't think anyone here will disagree that the U.S. isn't trying to encircle and contain Russia. I don't think anyone. I mean, Mirko, would you would you disagree with me on that?
No,
would you agree with me on that?
That's one of the you see, when you listen, are you familiar with Gabriele Krone-Schmalz, Brian? Have you heard this name before?
No.
Because she's very famous in Germany, and because she said these things about why, just like along the lines of Mersheimer, really, very, very similar. And she's become very unpopular. But I think what she said there is totally correct, and the country's been encircled and surrounded, and didn't know what to do anymore. But I think this was not the main point. I think the main point was, are those sentiments in Eastern Europe, are they true? And I think no one really, except for Alex, I mean, he's married to someone who's from a former Soviet republic, can have maybe a more direct sort of tuned into that. But for my personal experience, especially in the 80s and the 90s, it always felt very genuine and very true. And there was not because of US media influencing in those countries. So I think it's very real. And these things, they linger on for a long, long time. So saying this is decades back and people don't feel this anymore. I think, talking to some Hungarians and Polish about that, I'm not sure whether they would disagree, but I think we're not going to come to a conclusion on this one, right? At least not the four of us.
Well, Mirko, I want to
Alex,
answer that. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
Well, I was going to say, if I could share my screen, I just want to read from this 2004 Guardian article. And then the Guardian is right now very pro-US, NATO, EU, Ukraine. And I just want to read from this 2004 Guardian article, US campaign behind the turmoil in Kiev. And it says, right down here, it says, while the gains of the orange-bedecked chestnut revolution are Ukraine's, the campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that in 4 countries in 4 years has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes, funded and organized by the U.S. government, deploying U.S. consultancies, pollsters, diplomats, and 2 big American parties, and the U.S. government's organizations. The campaign was first used in Europe, in Belgrade in 2000 to beat Slobodan Milosevic at the ballot box. And then they talk about Richard Miles, the U.S. ambassador in Belgrade, played a key role. And by last year, as U.S. ambassador in Tbilisi, he repeated the trick in Georgia, coaching Mikhail Saakashvili in how to bring down his opponent. I'm not even going to try to pronounce that. And then 10 months after the success in Belgrade, the U.S. ambassador in Minsk, a veteran of similar operations in Central America, notably Nicaragua, organized a near identical campaign to try to defeat the Belarus hardman Alexander Lukashenko. And I read all of this because I just want to make it abundantly clear that this is not me as some kind of conspiracy theorist or someone who reads Russian media. I go through Western media and I look at admissions like this. There's this one from the New York Times from 2000, who really brought down Milosevic? And the answer is the U.S. government through all of these funding arms, media operations. And the point of going through all of this is to prove that how extensive and how absolute U.S. interference is in all of these countries. They run political parties, media organizations, social organizations, activists. They are funded and exist only because of U.S. money flowing into their bank accounts every single year. And you noticed in the Guardian article, they talked about Central America. I'm in Thailand. The U.S. funds opposition groups here, and they are literally shaping culture by investing in media organizations, in infiltrating education, and it's all emitted by Western publications like the New York Times, the Guardian, and you could even dig through the this one right here. This is Victoria Nuland talking about the billions that they invested in Ukraine since 1991, which is why I agree with you that it started in 1991. Exactly where it is. It's kind of a long here. Since Ukraine's independence in 1991, the United States has supported Ukrainians as they build the democratic skills and institutions, as they promote civic participation and good governance and all the preconditions for Ukraine to achieve its European aspirations. We've invested over $5 billion to assist Ukraine in these and other goals that will ensure a secure and prosperous and democratic Ukraine. And I want to add to that democracy is a process of self-determination. So the United States being involved in any of these processes, that is foreign interference. That is actually undermining democracy, not promoting it. And if it was the other way around, if it was Russia and China doing this in the European Union or to the United States or one of its neighbors in North America, it would be labeled foreign interference because it is foreign interference. It's very dangerous. And I'm just pointing this out to illustrate how a lot of this anti-Russian sentiment, this is manufactured by the US. And it may have a genuine root somewhere in history, but it persists to this day, decades after the Soviet Union went extinct, because the US is deliberately doing so to serve and advance its foreign policy objectives.
Mirko, thoughts on this? Thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Brian is
sure.
saying
I mean,
this is US led. This is
it's
US's
funny.
problem.
Can I ask a quick question? Are you guys all
Please do.
Americans?
No,
Where are you from, Alex?
Canada.
And Cyrus, you were Canadian or American?
I'm American and German.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny, like how you guys are really sort of trying to dissect your own government's doing, and I'm, as a German, trying to explain some of it back to you. I like it. Anyway, so I think two thoughts, Brian, really. I stick to my earlier statement that I feel we need to bring on a few Hungarians, Polish, and Czech people to sort of explain a little bit how their families historically are feeling about the Russians before any US money got into their media. I think that's really very, very relevant because my experience differs from how you describe that. The second one, I just had a funny thought when you were just wrapping up. I was thinking, we Germans were very happy when you guys came in at the end of the Second World War and started to influence us in the right way, in a good direction. And very happy that, we were led by the Marshall Plan, building democratic institutions and, coming up with our first constitution. And then the poor fellows over there on the other side in East Germany, and I was, I was one of them, they, oh my God, they ended up in a very, very poor and different environment that was really rather sad. And I spent 20 years in it, having been born in 1970. I was the last high school graduate in July 1989, literally sort of month before the wall came down. And I was so happy that we got that sort of US Western-led, and again, back in the 50s and 60s, financed, influencing and meddling going on. Oh man, bring it on. Very thankful for that.
But at the end of the day,
go ahead, Brian.
Well, at the end of the day, regardless of how you feel about it, it's a violation of international law. It utterly undermines the UN Charter. And then if we're talking about, foreign interference, influencing the political undermining, removing the political independence, then at that point, we're not talking about nations. We're talking about empire. We're talking about a world, the so-called international rules-based order, which is actually just the United States. It's in all of these countries. It has removed their political independence, and it is interfering, and it is directing their destiny to the point where, at the time, or maybe even now, you still think that it's great, but in reality, do you really feel that U.S. influence over Germany right now is serving Germany's best interests? Nord Stream gone, the energy prices indefinitely rising, this proxy war that Germany has been dragged into, is this now serving Germany's best interests, would you guess?
Maybe not everything. I mean, it's complicated, right? But I think this is not where we started. We started with this influencing, and I think you're shedding some light on it, that people just don't think about it that way and don't perceive it that way. And that happiness was sincere back in the day. I know you want to sort of highlight a principle that's being violated, but if people, that's why I said earlier to you, that's why I felt it's falling on fertile soil.
Mirko, and then not to interrupt you, but wasn't the whole concept of violating basic principles and values and people being happy with it, isn't that what got Germany in trouble in the first place before World War II.
No, don't understand the question. What do you mean?
What I'm saying is you're claiming that maybe the United States is violating international law, maybe it's interfering, but as long as everybody's happy about it, then it's okay. And I'm saying, isn't that how Germany got in trouble and got involved in World War II in the first place? They had a regime in power that was putting all these ideas forward that completely violated the rights of people, basically international law at the time. But they convinced people that it was great and they were happy and they went along with it, and look at the consequences. What I'm saying is values, basic principles, international law actually matter. And the fact that you can convince someone to be happy about trampling it in reality doesn't mean that it's okay or that it's good or that it's not at the root of the problem somehow. It actually absolutely is still at the root of the problem, even if you don't think that it is.
I think that case that you're referring to was not a case of foreign influence, unless you go back to the fact that Hitler was Austrian. But I think that's not what you mean. Or
my point is his rise to power, what the Nazi Party did to Germany. They convinced people in Germany that this was the right way, even though they were violating German values and laws. And then they went on to violating international law on top of it all. And they convinced people that this was the right way to go. And people in their minds were fully dedicated and happy to even die to defend this, when in reality, they had trampled everything that Germany was supposed to be. And they trampled international law, and they sent Germany down a self-destructive path. That's my point. I'm not saying that foreign interference created Adolf Hitler. I'm saying the idea of convincing people to be happy about something they should be upset about, that is a reality. That's what got Germany in trouble in the first place. The fact that America can convince you to be happy about them usurping your national sovereignty, that happiness has no relevance in terms of international law and what are actually in the best interests of the people of Germany or any of these other countries being interfered in.
Let me jump in here. Let me add a little perspective here. I think so far we've had a lot of interesting topics being brought up. I appreciate Mirko sharing his insight. That's why I remember you telling me, your first foreign language was Russian. That you grew up in Eastern Germany, which obviously was very different, right? My mother grew up in Western Germany. My mother's from Wiesbaden. So, I mean, very clear distinction on where you were born, right? I mean, she obviously growing up in West Germany. I mean, it was always the fact, I understand what Mirko, the point is saying here, because let me speak from my personal experience. For example, my mother growing up in Western Germany, American soldiers were always a very welcome sight. I mean, there was, and many Germans were very happy that America did get involved. I think Mirko hit that nail right on the head. I think when we look at World War II and Adolf Hitler, this is a very different circumstance what was going on. I mean, I absolutely support the U.S. getting involved in that war and destroy, defeating Hitler, for the sake of the future of humankind. Very different scenario, I think. And I think what my main point is, I feel that's really the last war that the United States really needed to get involved in. I mean, that was an exception to the rule, where Hitler had to be defeated. I think many Germans, as Mirko had pointed out, very happy that the United States got involved and certainly put Germany on a different pathway forward. I think the issue is that when we look at all of these subsequent wars that are going on, did the United States need to get involved in Vietnam? Well, no, we feared the domino effect, right? That, if Vietnam stays communist, that it's going to be a domino effect. Everybody's going to go communist. And I also want to highlight what Mirko said is, there is a lot of these preconceived notions about Russia, and I mean, I would say that we have the same in the United States. I mean, we've never looked favorably upon Russia. I mean, you look at, for example, anytime you see a Russian actor in an American movie, they're always the villain. Right, you're always the villain. You go to Rocky, one of our most famous American movies. Right, it's the great American boxer Rocky, and he's going against, the tall, Russian, Soviet Union, the big blonde guy, that's, and it's always this USA versus Russia. Look at Top Gun, one of our best propaganda films of all time. All of a sudden, you've got these Soviet Union planes coming in, and Tom Cruise, blasts them out of the sky. Great, America wins. I mean, we've always had a very negative impression of Russia. I mean, ever since I grew up in America, I mean, we've never looked at Russia in a favorable light ever. So, I think there's a lot of things that we could have done better. I think once the Soviet Union fell, I mean, interesting point. I mean, once the Soviet Union fell, one of the first moves was Russia wanted to join NATO, and we rejected them. We said, absolutely not. We don't want you in here. And there's a lot of things that you know, the United States could have done to facilitate Russia being accepted more. And so I understand, you know, certainly, you know, people from the former Czech or Polish or, you know, that Eastern European would certainly have a very negative impression of Russia. I can totally understand that. But I think it goes to the same line of, you know, you know, kind of bringing China into the discussion. I mean, this is what we see a lot with, you know, many Westerners and their perceptions of China. I mean, we look at the red China, the, you know, communism, and, you know, so many people have just a very low understanding of what China is, how it functions. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, many Americans, I will speak specifically to my country here. I mean, many Americans are very ignorant. I mean, we have many Americans that still look at China, no matter how advanced and how modern that country is, they still look at it as if it's 1970, 1980, you know, very far behind communism. There's, you know, it's a horrible life there. No one has freedom. Everybody's just, you know, it's in, you know, for all intents and purposes, many Americans look at China like it's a North Korea. You know, that's their perception. That's their understanding. And so, I mean, I think we can definitely bring that to the table, where countries, no matter where you are, you have these preconceived notions, you have these beliefs of what China is, what Russia is. You know, so I think it's very interesting. You know, I mean, I always try to keep a very open mind. For example, my children, they go to an art class here in North America, and so every Saturday we go to an art class, and the teachers are Russian. You know, and so they've come here, and they have a very, you know, very interesting chatting with them about, you know, this whole, you know, situation. And, you know, and they had said, oh, we've just come back. We went, you know, over Christmas break, we went back for a holiday. We were, you know, excited to go back home. I mean, it's our country. You know, we are, you know, obviously very complicated at the moment. So, I mean, they have to very much lay low here in America. But it's fascinating to get all of these opinions and to facilitate this dialogue. I mean, but I think what Brian, but also to you know, there's a great, to kind of highlight what Brian said as well with the United States meddling. I mean, there's a really great YouTuber, Johnny Harris. I mean, he's one of the best YouTubers out there. He has a couple ones. Just a month ago, made a video called "The U.S. Loves to Meddle in Other Countries," and it's basically mapping every U.S. secret operation. So, I mean, I think I would definitely agree with Mirko as far as World War II and Hitler. I think I don't mind the United States meddling in that country's affair in that regard. But I mean, one of the things that we know from the United States is that we do meddle in many countries' affairs. I mean, that is basically our MO, our modus operatus. I mean, that's what we do, and we have the United States interest. We are very aggressive in how our foreign policy dictates, and if you don't fall in line with that, you know, you know, the United States is gonna, you know, we want to change it. Everything's about the rules-based order, which is basically America first, right? I mean, that's what our former Secretary of State Michael Pompeo would always say. You know, like our best, you know, Germany, your best interest, your best foreign policy interest is America first. Always keep us number one. And again, I think Brian brought up a good point as far as, you know, is that serving that? You know, Alex, bring up that one slide I have. I mean, this is an interesting. I think it's slide number 23.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think this is just an interesting one. And I don't know. I'm kind of curious to hear your insight into this, Mirko. You obviously know this very much. So this is a fellow German who says, "Good morning from Germany, where price pressure remains high. Supermarket inflation rose to 22% in February, the sharpest increase in the start of time since the early 1990s. Pasta prices have increased in price by a third. Price for sugar up 70% year on year." I mean, what's my question to Merkel? What's the feeling in Germany right now? I mean, like, how is your energy bills right now? I mean, have they skyrocketed? I mean, what are people saying? I mean, right now when all of these food and energy and, I mean, the Nord Stream pipeline has been destroyed. I mean, this is a very interesting one that I would like to get your insight in. You know, how was Germany reacting to this?
Yeah, good question. Honestly speaking, when we got the bills, because in Germany they announced the prices, sort of the energy prices, sort of ahead of time. So I got the bill, I guess, around September, October, I believe, for sort of electricity and also gas heating. Yeah. We were scared because it was double the usual. A little more than double. And then it didn't happen. It was a lot better than people anticipated. We obviously started sort of being a little bit more frugal in the house with electricity and also water, warm water, just to be sort of more conscious. And frankly, once these price increases were sort of flying in the door, people thought now the support for Ukraine has to be dwindling. It's got to be sort of going down. And it didn't. People were basically, the core, as I said earlier, there's always been a fringe on the left and right that was sort of more about sort of not getting involved and let the Ukrainians deal with that. It's not our business, etc. But like that's a core in Germany was still siding with the Ukrainians. And that's the fact today as well. I didn't see Holger's post there. Holger's a pretty good guy. For sure, prices have gone up. Frankly, when I came back from China and here in the kitchen in the morning, I listened to Bavarian radio, Bayern 3. And I was shocked in the first weeks because they have this show in the morning where people have to call in and then they have to answer a question and it's a little quiz or whatever have you. And basically the price was that the radio station would buy a weekend's shopping tour to the supermarket. They would basically foot the bill. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, that is just how, like what happened in Germany. This just looks almost like social sort of assistance in a way. I was like, oh my God, so something is going on. But something else I wanted to, that came to mind, and I want to share this with Brian and hear what he has to say on that. Because this sentiment in Eastern Europe, I'm thinking about this because this meddling, for sure, that's happening. And I'm sure this is very effective what the US is doing there. But at the same time, and I think I shared a snippet with you, Cyrus, the other day. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, I'm running a China fund, but one of my colleagues, Stefan Gruszka, he's Polish. And he was based in Kiev for many years and in Moscow, speaks fluent Ukrainian and Russian. He manages our emerging market fund. And each time I see these videos from Russian talk shows, and there's a guy, very well known, is one of the top sort of talk show moderators, always like 6-7 participants, and then himself, Solovyov, I think is the name. And when you listen to this stuff, and I have to rely on subtitles because my Russian is not that good anymore. It's all got sort of, the space got hijacked by my Chinese, so I don't know where my Russian is gone. But so I send it to him and have him verify the subtitles. And I've been looking at these talk shows now for close to 9 months. It's mostly the same nightly talk show. And they invite professors and sort of the Russian intelligentsia, if you like. And this is really scary stuff. I mean, you've seen it, Cyrus. And this is also what's being sort of spreading to the Polish, to the Czech, because they can understand 70 to 80% of what the Russians say. It's Slavic language. It's a lot of commonalities there, right? So they don't need translators. They get the gist, right? And so all I'm saying is the war right now in Ukraine is definitely not helping the Russians to improve their image. It's basically just confirming all the biases. Have they been US-induced or not? But this is now there. And then you see these talk shows and what they say about Europe and what they would do with Eastern Germany and what they would do in Poland, not very smart because this stuff finds its way to an audience that it wasn't intended for.
So Mirko, let me jump into this conversation a bit. You're basing this on a few guys that you've been watching on the internet that have some followers, and when they're
misunderstanding, Alex.
No, I'm a little bit clear on this. Once again, you said that this infiltrates itself to the Polish, who can somewhat understand most of what's being said, and it's giving a bad image on the Russians. Is that pretty clear?
Misunderstanding. It's a misunderstanding.
Give it to me again, then. Let's hear it again.
Okay, because Cyrus has seen it as well. It's one of the biggest and best known Russian television talk shows with the biggest audience.
Yeah, I watched some of the clips. Yeah, I mean it's a very well programmed. Like, I mean, it's Mirko. Is it like the top Russian talk show? It would be
I think so.
Yeah, something like that. So it's
where do you watch
Russian
it?
Talk show.
You watch it on YouTube?
No, it's been spread on Twitter. You can see lots of this stuff
Twitter,
on Twitter. Yeah,
because it's blocked on YouTube, right? Probably.
No.
Well, I'm almost certain anything Russian is, and anything media oriented
Good
regarding
question.
Russia mostly is.
Yeah, I should most likely. Well, anything
Well,
Russia has
what were they
been-
saying? What were they saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe you should play it here. I don't memorize this stuff. It's pretty.
just
I
give
mean,
us
the
a
basic
snippet.
idea.
I mean, it's basically. Yeah, Cyrus, you want to give it a shot?
Well, I remember you sent me the. I forgot the one. Well, let me actually. I think you sent it to me on LinkedIn. Let me just try to pull it up. I think.
But it's basically what they would do with the Polish country once they go back in it and occupy it, and then what they would do with the women in East Germany once the Russian soldiers take the country over again, and they would show them what they really can do. But it's on state television. It's and it's a very well-known. I mean, in Germany we have like 2 or 3 of these types as well. Super well-known sort of talk show hosts, very well-spoken. But then you see when everybody's
I get your
chiming
point
in.
now, Mirko. I get your point now, and I think every country has kind of a banner machine that gets out there and rah.
I mean, Ukraine literally has Nazis, like modern day real, not neo-Nazis, Nazis who are the descendants of the Nazi collaborators during World War II. So you could look at both sides and see unsavory things said. But one thing I will say is it's the Russian government officially saying this, whereas some of these Nazis in Ukraine are actually incorporated officially into Ukraine's armed forces. So I mean, that is a huge difference right there. I just want to get back to the points where we keep talking about what people think. You can convince somebody of anything. In Nazi Germany, they convinced the population that was a good idea and we were on the road to success, and instead dismantled the country almost to the last brick. Now you say today, people in Germany support Ukraine. Why? Based on what?
Yeah, and pretty good propaganda, I would say, Brian.
That's what I'm. That's where I'm going with this.
I'm a bit confused here, Mirko. So this program coming out of Russia, being watched by Poles, they're getting upset that they're hearing what nasty things that Russia might do to the country. I mean, Mirko, from your research, give me a person on the ground, let's say in the Donbass area.
From my research,
anybody in the Donbass?
Cyrus, did you misintroduce me?
No.
Hold on. Sorry, guys. I'm a China guy. Okay.
Hold on. Actually, let me.
But you're making some pretty bold comments regarding Russians here, and I feel the need to maybe kind of.
I'm just citing evidence, nothing else.
What evidence? Okay, and give me the floor if you don't mind, Cyrus, for a moment.
Sure.
I appreciate you giving your opinion, but now it's maybe time that you can take an opinion back yourself here from myself. I'm going to give you a little bit of insight on myself here and knowing what I feel has been going on the last 8 or 9 years here. I totally put the blame 100% on the United States of America for poking the bear here in Russia. How do I come to that conclusion? Well, in 2014, I tried to find the answers from media. Yes, I went on and I saw the Americans beating their drums. In fact, I saw Lindsey Graham beating his drums very, very loud, saying, we need to go in. We need war. In fact, here is him and John McCain talking about it in the Ukraine in 2015 and 16.
Your fight is our fight.
Ваша боротьба – це наша боротьба.
2017 will be the year of offense.
Рік 2017 рік буде ріком нападу.
All of us will go back to Washington and we will push the case against Russia.
Ми всі повернемося до Вашингтону і ми будемо відстоювати санкції проти Росії.
Enough of a Russian aggression.
Досить вже російської агресії.
It is time for them to pay a heavier price.
Час вже щоб вони заплатили важчу ціну.
I believe you will win. I am convinced you will win, and we will do everything we can to provide you with what you need to win.
Я вірю в те, що ви виграєте, переможете. Я переконаний в тому, що ви переможете, і ми вам допоможемо всіма можливими засобами.
Це те ж саме гільзи з ворожих БМП, які розмальовані художниками Бердянська.
З Новим роком, дорогі мої!
Well, not done yet. Let's fast forward to February 28th of this year. Maybe you guys might recognize this guy from this clip.
I like the structural path we're on here. As long as we help Ukraine with the weapons they need and the economic support, they will fight to the last person.
National television in the United States. What a great propaganda machine the Americans have brought to the world here. Mirko, senators talking about fighting to the last soldier. 2000.
Wait, Alex. I just want to point something out real quick before we go to Mirko. I want to point out that McCain and Graham were in. They backed the illegal and unjust invasion of Iraq. They were on the ground in Syria and in Libya, destroying those two countries, and now they're in Ukraine. And this was before Russia began its military operations. So they're there. So, what are we supposed to think about this? Is this the first time the U.S. is on the right side, or is this just another war and people are just buying into it because they've got them hooked on the same propaganda and the same type of lies that they used to sell the invasion of Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Syria? So now they're in Ukraine. And another thing, Georgia, they overthrew the government in Georgia in 2003. They poured U.S. weapons and military training into Georgia. And then in 2008, according to the EU, their investigation, they attacked Russia and they triggered that war in 2008. Then the U.S. goes into Ukraine in 2014, overthrows the government, pumps it full of weapons, are training the Ukrainian military. It's right on Russia's border. What are they supposed to think is coming next? It's like someone sets up a cannon in your neighbor's front yard, gets the cannonballs next to it, brings in the gunpowder, packs the balls and the powder in, and blows their house away. Now they're dragging it to your front lawn. Do you wait until he fires the first cannonball through your front door, or do you do something about it? So this is the situation that Russia was in from 2014 to 2022 when they began this. And then to have people say, I support Ukraine, support them because of what? To do what? For what reason?
Yeah, I'm a little bit mystified here. I mean, Merkel, I know you spent a lot of time in China, but I have to go back to your points regarding Russians here. You have a pretty one-sided view on Russians since, I think, the 1940s. And you felt that, and unless I'm wrong here, do you see anything good that they have maybe done since 2014 here to protect some of the ethnic Russians in the eastern part of Ukraine?
I think you misunderstand, Alex.
Don't.
I've been...
Well, let Marco speak.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Give him the floor.
I've been portraying to you, and that's how I understood Cyrus, what he wanted to hear, what we know about how Eastern Europeans feel about this, how families are talking about the Russians. Don't make those my views. Okay, you just said this is how I see the Russians, and I see them very one-sided.
But Merkel, you're talking for Eastern Europeans. How can you say that? My wife is from Eastern Europe for 20 years. She does not share the same view at all from you. So that's what I'm saying.
Maybe you weren't listening when I started out talking about this. I was saying we, as a family, we spent most of our holidays back in the 70s and 80s in those Eastern European countries. So we traveled to Hungary, went to the Balaton Lake. We met lots of Hungarian families there. I spent my winter skiing in the Czech mountains near Karlovy Vary. We went to Poland. So that's why we have a lot of sort of acquaintances and friends, and you hear lots of stories. And this is what I've heard when I was little. It's not my personal view. It's just things that I wanted to sort of portray here.
I kind of think it is your personal view. I mean, my grandfather died in the Second World War, sunk by a German U-boat. But you know what? I holiday in Germany. I don't hold it against the people. I don't hold anything against the people. And for you to sit here and say that Eastern Europeans talk amongst themselves and this is how they feel about Russia, I think that seriously, you might be a little bit misguided on how people are actually feeling. Maybe they're afraid to talk out about it. Maybe they're afraid to not go against the Western media and the media machine. But for most part, I'm kind of confused here. A little bit confused on where you're going with this.
Your confusion, I can't help you, Alex.
Well, I just, if I could just say, we're talking about how Eastern Europeans feel. not what they actually know in the realm of fact, what they feel, what they think, what they believe is happening. So Eastern Europeans have a bad perception, or at least some of them have a bad perception of Russia. And we all just looked at the Western media admit that the US is pumping money into these countries to make them think that. Cyrus was talking about Americans and how they view China. Now, it is completely detached from reality. It is based on deliberate lies that the Western media deliberately tells the American people, because the agenda is to contain, subordinate China. So they need to make China and its people, they need to dehumanize them, and they need to get American people generate this hatred toward them. We've watched this. We watch this every day now, increasing. And so it's the exact same process. It's called propaganda. You could convince people of anything if you're able to either completely control or dominate a nation's information space. You could convince them of anything. In America, people are convinced that China is their enemy, that it's a horrible, backwards place. It needs to be dealt with. And in Eastern Europe, again, with US money, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, pumping the idea that Russia is this horrible menace that needs to be dealt with. And I think talking about what people think, maybe we should move on to Mirko. Why do you support Ukraine? Or if you don't, why do the people in Germany still support Ukraine? Based on what? I'm very curious about this.
Because their country is being invaded. That's why.
So then,
I think that's basically when you look at the German when you watch a German talk show, yeah, like Maybrit Illner is like a very famous one. That's the aggression against the Ukrainian country, right? The Ukrainian people. That's the main reason where the Germans feel we need to support them. They just see the pictures, and that's exactly. And also, it's a lot closer to us than to you guys, right? So it's people actually they drive their own cars through Poland over the Ukrainian border to bring all kinds of needed supplies for families, for pregnant women, for children. It's basically most of the German companies are organizing these kind of charity events where they sponsor cars and bring all kinds of things to Ukrainian families where the houses have been destroyed. And so there's a sense of solidarity and warmth where they really feel they need to do something. They need to help, right? It's not about being against the Russians. Maybe we can leave that out for a moment. It's not so much against the Russians. It's really for helping the Ukrainians, because they are suffering now, right? And the suffering is very real. And this is what the German population, the people that actually organize these things, sympathize with. And I think it's very honorable that they do that.
Yeah.
Why?
Go ahead, Cyrus. Let's give Cyrus the floor for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to kind of also shift this a little bit more towards China as we're just past the hour mark here. But I think we've all brought up a lot of good points here. I mean, I think, for example, I'm here in North America, and I think we can all empathize with war. I mean, war is a terrible thing. Nobody likes war. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, Ukraine has been wrecked. I mean, there's been civilian lives displaced. There's been many killings. There's, Russia and Ukraine have both lost a lot of lives. I mean, anytime war's happening, it's awful. I mean, there's just no other way to say that. And I think, for example, why do most Germans support, Ukraine? I mean, it's certainly more of a humanitarian level. I mean, we can see people suffering. It's no different than here in North America. I mean, and the fact, and the majority of Americans, we don't understand. Like, if you were to ask that question, when did this conflict begin? There would be less than 1% would say 1991 or 2014. I mean, I would say, most Americans are very ill-informed on what's happening in the world, our history. I mean, most Americans don't even know the capital of Canada. I mean, it's abysmal how terrible our geography and world knowledge is. But the issue here is that we just look at it from, Russia invaded, we got to support Ukraine. That's the vast majority of Americans who support Ukraine are going to go down that line of thinking. But
and Germans, apparently.
Well, I mean, I think most Western world, right? I mean, I think that's very common because we don't know the history, right? I mean, I'll be the first to say that I'm not a Russia-Ukraine expert, and I had to do a lot of research. That's why, for example, I brought on a guy like Patrick Lancaster on my channel because here's an American that lived in the Donbass region for the last 9 years, and I'm like, well, this guy should, this guy. I can learn from him. I don't know. Like I need what's going on? What's been going on in the Donbass region for the last 9 years? Educate me. That's why I'm curious. That's why I have a YouTube channel. That's why I want to have Mirko and Brian and Alex and myself, everybody here to chat about this. But Alex, can you bring up my 24 slide, number 24? Because Mirko, this is something that you and I were chirping on LinkedIn, and I kind of want to direct it now to China, which I know you have a lot more experience in, and certainly can provide some good perspectives here. But I think this is an interesting article. I mean, we saw, you had mentioned on LinkedIn, this Iran Saudi Arabia deal. Maybe it's just a one-off, peace deal. You kind of mentioned, maybe it's just one-off. I thought this was an interesting insight from Chaz Freeman, who is a retired U.S. ambassador who served in both China and Saudi Arabia, who says, among other things, this suggests it's a mistake to dismiss China as a potential peacemaker in Ukraine, as we reflexively did. So, I mean, I kind of want to shift this conversation to, how do we end the war? And, can China play a piece in this? I mean, obviously, China's come out with this 12-point peace plan. Many people feel that is just an actual a strategy paper or just like a position paper, right? They've kind of basically a summary paper of where they've kind of felt. And, we know that China is very close with Russia. I mean, obviously, they have a very good relationship economically. They're still trading together. Russia has been a very big beneficiary of very cheap Russian oil and gas. And so I think it's interesting is, what is the end here? That's kind of the theme of the video. Like, what is this? How do we get to the end here? I mean, is it? Well, yeah, that's kind of my.
Let me add to that, Cyrus. And I mean, we got to get to the end here. First, we got to understand how we got here. And Mirko, just because I'm not over on that side of the pond at the time, I do have a very good person on the ground there, a little bit more than the average talk show on television. His name is Patrick Lancaster. He is an American that has been in the Donbass area since 2013. I have visited him in the eastern part of the Ukraine. I've also visited him in Transnistria during that time. He was the first person that I really reached out to because I was confused on what was going on in that region. After seeing eastern Ukraine being bombed by its own military, if we can take our geography book out here for a moment, you have the Ukrainian army shelling the eastern part of the country with the unelected new government that was in power, which banned and burned books eventually. You have to understand how we got here. And I'm going to tell you, if you're not aware of Patrick Lancaster, he is risking his life. He is archiving for you and me and for future war tribunals to come that there are going to be a heck of a lot more people than you think on the Ukrainian side going away for war crimes like you could not imagine. The 14,000 people that died in the Donbass area, I'm going to bring up a figure for you. Maybe this will give you a good idea. In the region, Donetsk, Luhansk, you can see the figures there. 2,420 civilians between 2014 and 15. 1,185 civilians in the LPR between 2014 and 15. 5,000 civilians from 2014 to 18, and 2,269 civilians killed since this whole thing took off. Now, to add proof to this, and then I'm going to hand it back over to you guys, to add proof to this, where the Ukraine go a bit wrong, all you have to do, and what I asked you at the start of this live stream that we did, is have you actually read the Minsk agreement? Well, I'll read it for you quickly. We can also say that was help brokered by the Germans and the French as well as the Russians. And it's very easy to follow in this agreement. But if you go through it step by step, you will see something that really catches the attention here, where the Ukraine government admits that it cuts off the pension to its own people, cuts off the water, cuts off the electricity, cuts off the banking system, blows up a $500 million airport, and pretty much bombs its people into submission. My friend, I don't know about you, but this, in writing, negotiated twice in 2014 and 2015 by European Union elected members that have met and said, yes, Ukraine did do wrong here. Let's try to do right. Didn't. And this is how I honestly believe how we got here today. Russians are bad on this one, trying to broker an agreement in 2014 because ethnic Russians were being bombed and killed, and their water and their pensions and their electricity was shut off. What else did we expect? That's my point. Over to you, Merkel. Love to hear, Merkel, love to hear what you got to say.
I really liked your slides, especially the part up in the right corner. Let's talk China.
Thank you.
Because Cyrus, your redirect to China clearly didn't work, but maybe you want to give it another try. We can actually have a word on China in a moment. But I totally agree with all of that, Alex. I mean, we all know that, and it's terrible. And this is all about the reasons for this war. But I mean, it's an hour 18 now, and I thought it's going to be a little bit more sort of Russia, China, Ukraine, and so on.
But we can pivot to China. I'm all about.
I just want to make this point because Merkel said, why do the German people support? Why do the German people support Ukraine? Because it was invaded. Another nation invaded and utterly destroyed and still being occupied is Syria. Why doesn't the German population care about Syria? And as Alex was pointing out, the Donbas region was being devastated for 8 years. Where was all this German sympathy? And I'm not blaming the German people. I'm telling you that it is a product purely of propaganda. You were told to care about Ukraine and to support Ukraine, and that is why German people support Ukraine, not because it was invaded. Russia, technically, what they did was invade, but they are intervening in the middle of an ongoing war where thousands of people were already being killed, and they were intervening in a ongoing war that was not started actually by Ukraine. It was started by the US. They're using Ukraine as proxy, just as they did with Georgia. Only Ukraine has a much larger population and military equipment was flowing in, and it was designed specifically to threaten and provoke Russia. And they were left with no choice. And so that's what I'm trying to explain since the very beginning. You can be convinced of anything, because someone using propaganda can make you think anything is going on. The whole point of all of this and showing the articles and going through the facts is to show how much disparity there is between the propaganda that has convinced Germans to blame Russia and supports Ukraine. The difference between that and actual reality is massive. And we're not going to end this conflict until people actually understand what's really going on, that it's a proxy war. It's not about Ukraine talking with Russia. It's about the United States no longer waging proxy war on Russia.
Cyrus, we're
pretty-
pivoting to you. I think we're going to focus a bit on China.
I think we've kind of established that, I think Merkel's agreed, right? The United States has, we all know this. This is, no one's going to deny the fact that the U.S. Gets involved in things and intervenes in other meddles, right? We love that word, meddling, in other countries' affairs. I think, as far as Merkel said that from the beginning, right? 1991 was the start of this conflict, obviously the fall of the Soviet Union. It's a very complicated situation, and I think what's really good what Brian and Alex have brought up, and it's just the education that more people just need to know a little bit more. This is a very complex situation, right? No one in this panel thinks that this happened 1 year ago. Right, it's not like Russia just all of a sudden, invaded a sovereign country out of nowhere. This has been going on there's been a tremendous amount of violence. There's been a lot of civilians killed. This is a conflict that has its roots, 30 years ago, and even 9-10 years ago had major problems happening. But again, let's as we're kind of coming up to hour 20 now. Let's pivot to China, though, because I do want to go back to that slide and kind of get Mirko's opinion on this, because I know, I think there's an interesting argument from, some people have said, potentially, Iran and Saudi Arabia were already looking to, normalize relations again. And,
Exactly.
and certainly I think that China has an opportunity here. I mean, China's very strategic. I mean, in their foreign policy, they know what to do, and they are always an angle for China as well. Obviously, with the Belt and Road, I mean, they're increasing their influence and helping countries as well. I've done a huge deep dive on Belt and Road projects around the world. But let me just get your thoughts on China. Let's pivot to that, Mirko.
Yeah, interesting one, huh? You see, and what worked in the case you just showed there in with this tweet is that Wang Yi traveled extensively to both places.
Yeah.
Even Xi Jinping went, right? And what is missing in the Ukraine piece is that Xi Jinping has met Putin, 40 times? Not even counting the phone calls.
Yeah.
He hasn't met with Zelensky yet, ever.
Yeah.
And he had only one phone call, which was in. Sorry, I just got a call. He only had one phone call with him, I think, in just a sec. So is it back now? Yeah. I think in 2021. And so far, he hasn't even talked to the guy, right? Wang Yi travels straight to Moscow, doesn't go to Kiev. Xi Jinping is not talking to Zelensky. This is just in terms of the ingredients you need for someone to really submit something that is digesting both sides, what they want, what they need, what happened, is a prerequisite of really doing that posturing. And again, this position paper, frankly, I'm not going to sure you guys follow the foreign ministry press briefings. This is exactly what they say every day. There's just nothing, literally not a single point in there was new. It's just basically what they're saying every day on the Ukraine crisis, right? I mean, a peace plan looks very, very different. And China is right now not in a position Zelensky himself said, what did he say? He said, it's good that China at least is talking about us.
Yeah.
But what he didn't say was that they should be talking with us about that.
Why should China talk to Zelensky? He's literally in charge of nothing. And if the U.S. pulled the plug, his country would disappear tomorrow. It would be gone. Why would this is my whole point. This is a proxy war. It's not a war between Russia and Ukraine. Kiev has no say in anything. They have no agency. That was the whole point of overthrowing the government in 2014 and putting hand-picked U.S. proxies in their place. Zelensky is a hostage to all of this at best. That is what he is. And so China going to Kiev, why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense. And it shows how China is being realist here. They understand what the real problem is, even if when they talk about it, people in the West don't understand. But I think the rest of the world actually does understand. They understand that if there's a dog barking at you, you don't get on all fours and bark back at the dog. You talk to the one holding its leash. And in this case for Ukraine, it is the United States. It is the United States that needs to be talked to and dealt with. And as we saw in other proxy wars, say in Syria, eventually it is going to just have to be settled on the battlefield. So if how to end the war in Ukraine, end it on the battlefield. That's the way it's going to have to be done, because the U.S. is never, as long as the U.S. is paying with Ukrainian blood and lives and money and infrastructure, they have no incentive to stop. And then for China to go talk to Zelensky for what?
I mean, Mirko, I mean, knowing that, for example, I mean, we what's interesting is I had here where I'm living right now, we have a U.S. Air Force base, very, very big base. So a lot of my classmates, their parents are in the military, Navy, Air Force. Interesting. I was talking with a fellow classmate's parent and last weekend, and he's in the Navy, and I was chatting. I was like, what's kind of the Navy? What's the U.S. Navy? What is their what is their belief? What is in your perspective? You're in the Navy. What do you think? And he said, honestly, Cyrus, this is best case scenario for U.S. Right? We can basically take on Russia, and we don't risk any American life. And I think so my question to you is, Do you think there's, I mean, there's definitely some reservation from China, and I think you know this, right? Amongst why so many Chinese people, right, normal Chinese citizens, I mean, overall, the overall sentiment in China is very much pro-Russia, right? And I think it's very much under the lines of, you know, if Russia falls, we're next. You know, I mean, you know, so I think, would you agree with that? You know, that you know, from the Chinese, that they need to be a little bit more, you know, cautious in this because they're feeling that, you know, the U.S. is going to come after them? I mean, given the fact that the U.S. is trying to contain China on all fronts at the moment?
No, not at all. I think it's entirely to do with the way this is being, how they are being brainwashed by their government, and what's being allowed on social media. Right? It's the same thing, Brian, that you're describing on this one end. The very much same thing happens on China and the Chinese themselves, the 老百姓, right? Like, frankly, what do they know? The only things they know is what you see on 8 p.m. CCTV evening news, 新闻联播, right? I mean, as Cyrus knows from LinkedIn, I sometimes sort of endure the pain of watching it just to know what's being said and what's being written in the People's Daily. I'm just reading all these original sources, and that gives you a good idea of what they think is happening, right? So total indoctrination.
But
what's interesting is that every fact that I laid out is from the Western media, if not from the U.S. State Department's website itself. So it's not China, and they're brainwashed themselves into thinking this is a proxy war. All of the evidence is there for anyone to see, and I think it's very condescending and disrespectful to think that China is just clueless and brainwashed, and they're not smart enough to look at what the West themselves have said with their own mouths. Victoria Nuland caught on the phone, hand-picking the Ukrainian client regime in 2014. And then to say that, no, this isn't about China being targeted next by the United States. The U.S. talks of nothing else. They have U.S. troops on Taiwan right now, specifically for the next proxy war, which will be with China, and they will be using at least Taiwan as the proxy of choice. And this is they themselves in their own policy papers, and every time they get behind a podium, this is them talking. So when you talk about brainwashed, I think maybe do some introspection on that.
Mirko, is
thank
it
you.
about?
I will do that, Brian.
Mirko, are you talking about
you actually
Chinese...
should really do that instead of just being dismissive and disrespectful. You should do that.
Mirko, are you talking about the Chinese people? Are you saying it, or are you talking about also?
Yeah,
the
exactly.
Chinese
That's
government?
sort of, yeah, no. I'm talking about the Chinese people, the kind of news that they can choose from, the kind of things they hear, right? I mean, I have a lot of sort of friends and family in China, and sort of talking to them, it's basically all they can say and repeat is the talking points from the government, what they find in official media, right? Even on social media, you cannot post sort of news anymore if you're not state sanctioned, right? So, and that's basically what I said, Brian. They're being brainwashed by their government, and that's all they know, right? And that's not dismissive.
Well, what the government is saying to the people is absolutely the truth about this being a proxy war and about China being next. That is demonstrably true. That is the U.S. themselves saying that. So how is it that they're being brainwashed if what they're being told is the truth? Can you explain that?
Yeah, I can explain this to you. If you were to watch Chinese news, evening news on 新闻联播, and sort of listen to what they say about the war, you will find that you can't see a single piece of footage of the disastrous tragedies that are happening in the Ukraine, the bombing of residential buildings. All you can see is sort of Russian artillery shooting rockets in the blue sky, and it's totally pretty. Chinese don't even have an idea, Brian.
You mean kind of like how you mean for like the last 8 or 9 years in the West, we never saw the devastation being rained down upon the Donbas region, right? Because and it's interesting you're doing this. So China censors and controls the media when it was the West that collectively eliminated not just Russian media, but anyone that was saying anything contrary to the central narrative. And people like me or Alex, maybe Cyrus has experienced this. We have to be very careful what we say because we will be deleted. Our finances will be cut. Our platforms will be suspended. So it's if you're going to accuse China of this, at least understand that it's as bad in reality as you're trying to suggest it is in China.
And let me add to this,
in the
Brian.
West.
Let me add to this as well. I was just at the international airport here on Friday talking to the Tourism of Thailand, TAT, and they welcomed 300,000 Chinese people. You're talking about, Mirko, you're talking about China as being like North Korea. I mean, on a busy year, 11 million people go to Thailand. I don't think they run and get off the phone and say, okay, for my first time ever, I'm going to get the truth. I'm going to open up Google and I'm going to just enlighten myself with all this media. Chinese people, they talk. People travel in, they travel out of the country. This is not they're not uneducated people. You're really being disingenuous here to the average Chinese person, making them feel like they are absolutely clueless. I'll tell you how great China is. China is so great that they managed to broker a peace deal between Iran and the Saudis. That to me says a hell of a lot more than hearing from someone saying that, hey, they don't know anything that's going on. They haven't seen anything. Maybe you haven't seen anything. Maybe
they're
it's time
lying to their public.
That is just.
Brian,
I work
realize...
every day with Chinese people. There is such an influence, a world influence in this country. 30 years ago, maybe I would have believed this story, but I'm sorry. I live here in the biggest city, one of the biggest cities here in China. I talk to Chinese people every day. We discuss politics. Am I the only guy, foreigner in the country, sharing information? I don't think so. And we really have to think about this propaganda machine that's going on in the West.
And as if Chinese people are too dumb to understand that when a rocket goes up, it has to come down somewhere and what that means. Chinese suffered immensely under wars precipitated by other nations, 100 years of humiliation. I think they understand quite well what war is all about. And I think that the reason they're not focusing on that the way the West is, because they're not trying to manipulate and elicit an emotional response from people like you. And that is exactly what you are a product of. This Western media that has repeatedly lied about Iraq, Syria, Libya. Ukraine is just another place to lie about and another place to misinform the Western public about, to prey on their emotions and most importantly, their ignorance. And get this kind of emotional response out of them. You're explaining perfectly what is going on. That is, the West is using propaganda to manipulate people emotionally, and China is sticking to facts and not trying to push people's buttons emotionally. I mean, you're saying it yourself.
Cyrus, can I say one thing?
Yeah,
Brian, you interrupted me again while I was saying what I was saying, and you both, Alex and Brian, are becoming a little bit ad hominem, a little bit sort of accusing me of things, and I feel very uncomfortable, Cyrus. And if you don't mind, I would like to sort of stop at this point. I think that's maybe the best for the program, if that's okay for you, Cyrus.
So I think, let me just kind of wrap up. We're coming up to 90 minutes, which is kind of the end of the show as well. I think. What's important, I mean, my goal was try to get everybody to have a nice peaceful discussion and just, we all have the different viewpoints. I mean, I think when we talk to propaganda exists everywhere in the world, right? I mean, United States, we're very good at it. China's very good at it. Many countries very good at it. So, I mean, there's always, and I think that's kind of the goal of trying to bring everybody together, because it's bringing in different perspectives. I mean, Mirko, I really like the fact that, you shared with me, look, I grew up in Eastern Europe. Russian was my first, foreign language that I learned. I think he brought in a lot of good perspectives. So I think it's just more what I wanted to try to do with this was try to talk about, like, how do we end the war, and try to find a solution here. But yeah, I think I think for today, Mirko, I thank you for your time. But I thank you for your time, and I appreciate you sharing your insights. I think it's healthy for a debate, because sometimes a lot of times when we're doing this show, sometimes we don't always get in the other perspective. I think it's great. That's why I asked you the question about Germany, like what about these food in crisis? What about this? How did that's why I appreciate those insights. I wanted to know from a German, what is the feeling on the ground.
Very happy to do that, Cyrus, and really sort of appreciate the invitation. I could tell that Alex and Brian really also like to hear my take on things.
Absolutely.
Well, I think no. I mean, I think we're all passionate about this thing. I mean, we're all talk about geopolitics. It's a very complicated matter.
passion is
There's
one
no there's no easy solution here. I mean, obviously we're having a live stream. I mean, it's not like we're going to, hey, guess what? We've solved the problem for everybody in the world. Like us four on YouTube, like it's done now. Like go ahead, Biden, Zelensky, Putin, Xi, like we sorted it out today here on YouTube for you. I mean, it's just trying to facilitate a discussion. And anyways, Brian, Alex, I thank you guys for your time. And
I think what we'll do, Cyrus, is we'll let you and Mirko go. I think you got commitments. I think Brian and I are going to probably stay on my channel if you got a bit of time, Brian. And
Sure.
up to you. Cyrus, I think you'll manually have to go into your channel and shut off the feed after, if that's cool.
Right. Okay. Perfect.
Okay. Mirko, what a pleasure. Anytime, next time I'm in Germany, maybe we can do a weekend in the Donbass. I'd like to introduce you to a really good friend of mine, Patrick Lancaster. I think you and him would get on like a house on fire. And I mean that genuinely. I mean, I think that I'm all about, it's not about me convincing people. It's about me kind of, hey, come see it. Let's see what it's all about. That's what happened to me in 2014 and 15 when I traveled there. I was totally like, oh, this is bad. What's going on with Ukraine, the Orange Revolution, all this stuff. And my life changed. This is why I started my channel, was a guy like Patrick Lancaster who really opened up my eyes. And you got to ask yourself, how does a guy grow from 26,000 subscribers to over 500,000 in a year? And that's people seeking what they feel might be the other side of the story. So anyway, I look forward to it.
Yeah, and Mirko, if I seem short-tempered, it is because I'm angry. But at the same time, I sympathize with you. I was an American who joined the Marines. I was among the most propagandized people on earth, the American people. I truly believe that the West was a force for good around the world. That is why I signed up. And even when I went overseas and I saw one example after the other, proving that we weren't, it took me a long time to wake up. So if it seems like I'm frustrated with you, not you personally, but just what the system, what the West and its media have done to people, what they've transformed them into. So I'm not angry at you. I'm angry at what they've made you become. And I hope someday you can maintain an open mind and maybe rise above it, what they've done.
Thanks,
Mirko, last words, Mirko. Go ahead. Take the floor, please.
Oh, no, I already said my goodbyes. Thanks for the invite, Cyrus. I really enjoyed it. Lots of good learnings for me. See the passion with you guys, and keep up your work.
All right. Thank you,
Great.
Mirko. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Cyrus. Thanks, Mirko. Take care, guys. Really, thank you very much for that. Well, Brian, this brings us to you and I on the screen here. Yeah, that was a very interesting conversation. And for Cyrus's audience, if you want to continue following the show, you can follow it on Reporterfy Media here. I'm broadcasting it on my channel, Reporterfy Media. You can see, let's see if I can put a link out for everyone. Let me just see. I'll put it up here. Reporterfy Media. Okay, so just look for that link or just look on YouTube for that, and you guys can find the show. Really, I didn't think Cyrus thought it would get that heavy, but what do you expect? Brian?
Well, again, I mean, it's hard to get angry at him because he's just repeating things that he heard. He doesn't understand what's actually going on. And what made me angry is, I guess the fact that in the beginning he said he was coming into this with humility, and then he was talking about how Chinese people are all propagandized and they don't know how to think for themselves. When in reality, that is what he was. That's the whole reason we were having this exchange in the first place, is because he never read the Minsk Agreement. This is the central pillar of this conflict, and people like him don't understand what it even is. If
do you mind if I bring that up? And do you mind if I bring it up and we can go over it?
Yeah, you can. And the point is, it's not Mirko's fault. It's the media never told him about that. So how does he know? So again, I kind of feel bad because I get angry. I get angry at what is being done to not just Ukraine and Russia and China and everywhere the West targets, but also the public in the West that I think are first and foremost the victims of this imperialism.
I mean, here we're looking at a slide here, and I'll go through this. And I just want to say once again, I didn't really have much time to go through this, but here's the Minsk Agreement, and here is the map. And look at how interesting this map is. This map was from the 2014-2015 buffer zone, which was being negotiated. This is pretty much where we are now. I know the Russians have pushed a little bit more forward on the map. But the Minsk parties that were involved here, we had the Russians, the French, Germans, and the Ukrainians that were negotiating this. It was very simple, very straightforward. It was a 13-point plan with the withdrawal of troops and heavy weapons, reintegrate Luhansk and Donetsk, and devolve the powers to the eastern regions. Now, I go and I hammer and hammer and hammer on this point because I always want to see, if I'm getting into a conversation with someone about this region, I want to first know that, were they aware in 2014 that there was a negotiated peace agreement which put Ukraine in the exact situation here? And I took the time to put these slides together, but here we go. We're going to walk through these quickly. First one was the immediate and comprehensive ceasefire in the certain areas. Remember, this agreement was implemented in the 15th of February, 2015 at 12 o'clock, okay? 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago now, okay? This was in writing and signed. Okay, let's move on. 2, withdrawal of all heavy weapons from both sides. I'll kind of quickly go through this. It talks about, the caliber of the weapons. It said, from certain areas, Donetsk, Luhansk regions of Ukraine, from the front line of contact, according to the Minsk first agreement in 2014, ceasefire. Okay, let's do the second one here. The third slide. Ensure effective monitoring and verification of the ceasefire regime and the withdrawal of heavy weapons by the OSCE from day one of the withdrawal, using all technical equipment necessary. Okay, so basically, get out, take your equipment out, get the hell out of the area, back away, both sides. Agreed. Okay. Number 4, launch a dialogue on day one of the withdrawal. Interim self-governing government, but no later than 30 days. Okay, they go on about this, talking about allowing Luhansk and Donetsk to allowed to continue to say separate. Now, this is point 5. Ensure pardon and amnesty by enacting the law prohibiting the prosecution and punishment of persons in connection to the events that took place. So this was a very serious agreement, very clear. Put the guns down. No one's going to jail. Prison transfer. Let's do it, okay? Here's another one. Ensure the release and exchange of all hostages, unlawfully detained persons based on the principle all for all. Get it? Very clear in writing. I'm not making this up, guys. Follow with me on this here, because this is what I was basing tonight's conversation on. If you're going to get into a dialogue about this area, you need to understand what this is all about. Ensure safe access, delivery, storage, distribution of humanitarian assistance. And I'm going to go through this. The definition of, here's the important one. Talking about social transfers, pension payments, income, revenue, timely payments of utility bills, and taxation. Can you imagine that all of this was shut off by Ukraine to its eastern population for years? Okay, the government has shut their own people off of pensions, getting water, electricity, everything. And this is the own country doing it. Brian, over to you.
Exactly. It was very clear, comprehensive, and if they simply upheld what they themselves signed, then this wouldn't even be happening. Instead, they decided they're going to sign it and then continue fighting anyway. And the plan, what the U.S. had already done in Georgia from 2003 to 2008, was to just build up Ukraine militarily as big as possible and then use it as a battering ram against Russia. And it's unfortunate we didn't get to talk about things like Crimea, because I'm sure he will say that that was invaded by Russia also, when in reality, all of those people wanted to join Russia. They were Russian. They identified as Russian. I got the U.S. Aid International Republican Institute. These are U.S. government-funded organizations. Their poll from 2013, where if they had to join some kind of economic union, is overwhelmingly they wanted to join Russia's customs union with Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan. And then they identify first as Russian 40%, Crimean 24%, and only 15% Ukrainian. And this was 2013, before they had many more reasons to want to join the Russian Federation. But when they were asked if they wanted to, almost a quarter wanted to join the Russian Federation, even before any of this unfolded. So after it unfolded, after they watched the elected government that, again, imperfect, I could totally understand why people would be upset with that government. But the U.S. removed it and put a specifically an extremely anti-Russian regime in its place, including a regime with Nazis in paramilitary organizations, and even at the very beginning, parties that were Nazi parties, political parties. So if you're in Crimea, you want out. And if you're in the Donbass, you want out. And probably in a lot of other places in Ukraine, you want out of that. That is not what anyone signed up for when in 1991, Ukraine came into existence as an independent country. And I don't know, I wish we kind of asked him some more questions about China, like why he thought that China doesn't think that they're next. They're not next after Russia. You know, the U.S. is targeting Russia, and that somehow China isn't next. The U.S. is already killing Chinese people all over the world right now in an ongoing proxy war. It stretches years. Baluchistan, U.S.-backed militants kill Chinese engineers there all the time. They attack and destroy pipelines, factories in Myanmar. They attacked Chinatown in the Solomon Islands. People were killed there. So it's already happening. It's not China's next. It's China and Russia are already in this together. That's why they're not going to go talk to Zelensky, because China going to Kiev and talking to Zelensky is only going to reinforce this fake narrative that the U.S. has cooked up to sell their proxy war.
I mean, I have to admit, the conversation probably got a little bit more heated. But then again, I'm trying to understand, what was getting my hair on fire during that conversation. And it wasn't necessarily about not wanting, a dialogue with someone to chat about. But the reason why people will get on this side of things, and what I mean by that is, when you're building a defense for your feelings are one thing, but then factual truth is another thing. Like, exactly. I can say I don't have great feelings for this, or I don't have great feelings for that. But then when you start to say that it's entire nations that agree because of this and because of that, it really doesn't, support the fact. And that's where I was saying, like, how is this possible that we only are hearing one side of the facts? Now, I think we're all big boys here. I think we all can handle a conversation like that. I'm totally fine after a conversation like that. I hope the audience doesn't feel like we outright attacked.
No, look, Alex, the thing is, we were laying out facts. We came prepared. We did our homework. We had things prepared. He could have done likewise. And what he continuously deferred to was emotions. How do the people in Eastern Europe feel? How do the people in Germany feel? They support it. But then every time we try to dive into actual facts, what's actually really going on, I mean, he doesn't even know about the Minsk agreement. So if you don't know about that, what do you know about this conflict, except the emotional narratives that were told to you specifically to prey on your emotions? And I would say they're good natured. They were told this sad, weepy tale, and they feel sorry for the Ukrainians, and they want to do their part to help. It's reduced to these elementary Hollywood-style narratives, and this is how the West has prodded along all of their wars of aggression and proxy wars and regime change operations for the entire 21st century, and they've carried out quite a few of them. And I just thought it was telling about how. The German people, they're so upset about what's going on in Ukraine. What about Syria? Why aren't they also upset about Syria? The EU is playing a role in that conflict as well. Libya, likewise. Why? Is it, I guess he's saying Ukraine is close by, but, nowadays nothing is really far or close by. We could just turn on the TV, I look on the internet, and we can see what's going on in everywhere all around the globe. There's no far or close. I think I don't want to put words into people's mouth, but I think the reason why Europe is, so easily manipulated into caring about this war, and they don't care about wars in the Middle East, because they're white. They're white people. Ukraine is white, and they have certain sympathies politically for certain ideologies that should have gone extinct generations ago, but they haven't. So this is all stirring around.
Yeah, it's interesting how, we missed some other facts. I mean, during this conversation, we missed another complete war that took place very close, right smack in the middle of Europe, Central Europe, in Serbia, Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
I mean, NATO-led, Clinton administration in trouble, having to deal with the president about to be impeached, Monica Lewinsky. DNA comes back, doesn't go in the president's favor, ramp up a war. Mrs. Albright comes into the play. The usual suspects come in 11 to 14 days later. 78 days of aerial bombardment, blow up the entire Yugoslavia, smash it into smithereens to never, ever be rebuilt to this day. How did we miss that?
That's actually, you're bringing up a really good point, because what I imagine people like that would say, people who are indoctrinated by the Western media, they would say, well, there was all of this infighting taking place, so that's why we had to intervene. Well, that is the whole point. This is why Russia is in Ukraine, because there was already a conflict ongoing, and they intervened. What the difference is, the U.S. engineered both cases of infighting. And I showed that Guardian article and also the New York Times article. They admit from top to bottom, the U.S. had infiltrated and manipulated, interfered in that region's internal political affairs. And that's what they do. And they divide people against each other. And it could be trying to rig elections, manipulate, influence elections, or it could be to start an armed conflict. That is what they did in Serbia. That is what they've done in Ukraine. They're busy trying to do it in Georgia right now. And again, I'm here in Thailand. I've got a video coming out a little later this week about U.S. interference here in Thailand. They're doing literally the exact same thing. And again, the evidence is all out there. But if you're the type of person that just reads Economist or the BBC or whatever these kind of people are watching on TV, you're not going to get any of this information. You have to dig a little bit, but you can find all of it in the Western media. They bury it at the bottom where you're not going to know, where they know you're not going to notice it.
I mean, Brian, your thoughts on where this conflict is going to end. What's your thoughts on that?
I compare it to Syria. A lot of people were talking about, we need all of these negotiations. We got to get the Syrian opposition to talk with Damascus. And the whole time, that went on for years. The whole time I said, it's not going to be settled through negotiations, because the opposition is not an opposition. They're just proxies. And the people behind them, sponsoring them, is the United States and their allies. So really, it has to be resolved between Syria, its allies, and the United States. And because, like I said, with Ukraine, as long as the U.S. is fighting a war with someone else's blood and treasure, they have no incentive to stop. So there really is no way to negotiate except change things on the battlefield so that it is impossible for the proxy war to continue. That is what they've done in Syria. That is what they're going to do in Ukraine. So it's going to be settled on the battlefield, I do believe, because Alex, you've been following this for so long, and you know how many times Russia has been admittedly lied to, especially about Minsk. They're not going to make another deal unless the facts on the ground make any sort of deal airtight.
My feelings about that is I feel that we are probably near an end game. What the end game is going to be and how it's going to come out, I think the casualties are going to start to rise. I think the true numbers are going to start to come out. And I think the support is going to wane here. And the pressure is going to be on. The battling is only going to get stronger and harder. And eventually, I think territory is going to have to be given up. I mean, it's a difficult one.
Absolutely. I mean, it's being physically taken from the client regime in Kiev, and that territory isn't going to be given back. And it's just a matter of how much at this point, because just think about it. If they agreed to the Minsk agreement, they would still have all of Ukraine except for Crimea. But then again, everyone in Kiev knows that Crimea was never really Ukrainian anyway. It was an autonomous region. It had its own independent parliament. They're just saying this as a sticking point, but in reality, they knew that it was never truly a part of Ukraine. So at that point, they could have preserved the territorial integrity of what they consider Ukraine. But at this point, no.
So back to this discussion that we had. I'm just going to try to answer someone's question here. But at what point did you feel that maybe what things were getting your hair on the back of your neck up? And I mean, did you feel that you were insulted sometimes, or what were your thoughts?
I feel his comments were very condescending, but again, that is a product of Western media indoctrination. They convince Westerners that they are the best, that they are superior, that they have all the answers, that they can go in and meddle and wage war and occupy, but no one else is allowed. And if they do, it's because they're horrible and evil, and we did it because we've got the best intentions. And that last part where he's claiming that the Chinese people are indoctrinated, like you said, this is not North Korea, but maybe even North Korea is not like North Korea, because how do any of us know? All we know is what the same liars who told us Iraq had WMDs tell us about all of these other different places, except China, because you're in China. I've been to China. China has a huge amount of they do a huge amount of business here in Thailand. So I'm starting to get to know China very well, and these people are not ignorant, and they're not brainwashed, and I find that they're typically much better informed than most Westerners about what's really going on. And if you ask Chinese people what's going on in Ukraine, they probably will say something along the lines of, this is the US. And they're doing to Russia what they're trying to do to us. And because I don't think Chinese people are oblivious to the fact that the US is threatening them, encircling them, and attempting to contain them. President Joe Biden openly says it. You're in China, so does the Chinese media talk about this?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, maybe all of us don't share the same opinion of that live stream, but I mean, if we can't have a live stream and to talk about important factors that get us emotionally charged, I mean, then what world are we in? I'm getting I'm going to tell you how I felt. I felt that I was prepared for this conversation tonight. I felt that for the first 30 minutes, I was pretty open to, and I'm going to watch this again when I get home and pinpoint it, but something managed to rattle me, and maybe you as a viewer could maybe pinpoint what was rattling me, because something managed to get me a bit more charged. I don't think I was insulting or rude or ignorant, but I felt that there was a part in that debate where I couldn't just sit and listen to certain things. And I think what runs through my mind here is, we have these difference of opinions, but you got to see where I'm coming from. My standpoint is I have a very good friend in the Donbass area who I am worried on a daily basis that he maybe get killed or die. This is very real. This is not a joke to the viewers. This is a good friend of mine, Patrick Lancaster. Patrick, I don't know if for the viewers, is an American that is inside the Donbass area. In fact, his last video was him moving closer and closer to the front line within about 800 to 1,000 meters away from the official front line, or the official territory that is being taken by the Wagner group. Now, am I going to get emotional about people saying that we're clueless on that, or I need to do this, or I need to do that? I have this feeling, Brian, that I had to at least defend myself on that. And I felt that I was prepared. And yeah, I'm actually, I'm a pretty fair-based guy, and when I get into this kind of discussions, just because maybe the tone of my voice comes up a little bit, it doesn't mean that I'm being rude or ignorant. But
no, it's fine. I mean, look at some other debates on the internet. This was pretty tame, I would say. Alex, I want to build on what you just said. You're talking about the Donbas region. I watch a lot of Patrick's videos, and I can't tell you how many of them are of Patrick in the middle of Donetsk city. And everyone is standing over a bunch of dead civilians, old people, kids, people just coming back from wherever, going about their daily business. And the people who are still alive are just saying, why? There's nothing around here. Why are they doing this? Sometimes it's like a HIMARS, which is a precision weapon that they're firing, or these guided these artillery shells are not so inaccurate that you could accidentally miss and hit the town square over and over again. They're doing it deliberately, and they ask why. And this has been going on for 8 or 9 years. And the thing that may kind of just push me past my limit is him complaining about Chinese people are brainwashed, as if he isn't. And that, they only get to see one point of view. Well, what about him? Has he seen these videos where there's dead kids in the middle of Donetsk city, where there isn't a single military target in sight? That makes me angry, because it's not humility at that point. It is, you think you're smarter and better than everyone else. They don't know what's going on. And then I'm tired of I'm just going to say this outright. I'm tired of white men talking about Chinese people like they're cartoon characters or something. They are building the largest, most powerful, most prosperous, and most peaceful civilization on Earth today. So I'm tired of white men denigrating the people who are building this civilization. I see here in Southeast Asia that has been squatted on by the United States and other European powers for generations. And I see how that's all being washed away by just China coming in and doing business and giving people strength and confidence to build their own societies the way they want to. And so when I see people like him talking about China that way, it's going to make me very angry. I'm tired of it. And someone from Germany should be a little more sensitive or self-aware of how easy it is to convince people of just about anything, even a national destiny that is basically suicide.
Yeah, well, apparently I've got to listen to this stream over again, because I'm getting the wrong insights on myself here, but I think I was pretty well prepared for it. And yeah, I'm not going to apologize anymore for it, because I speak sometimes with my feelings. I keep it professional, and that's how I thought I was tonight. Anyway, Brian, it's been a fantastic time. I look forward to doing another live stream. Maybe you and I can do one on your channel in the near future. That would be fantastic. And yeah, I hope to, I'm going to give you the last word here. You can chat with, give us your take on what you think is going to happen here in the next month or two in this, Ukraine, Russia battle. And after that, we'll say goodbye to our audience. Okay.
Okay. Well, just about Ukraine, it changes day to day, but yeah, everybody's focused on Bakhmut right now. The encirclement. We hear a lot of talk about an upcoming Ukrainian offensive. I saw some comments in the chat asking about the Ukrainian offensive. Depending on how big it is, this is going to tell us how committed Ukraine is to holding Bakhmut and what resources they have left to do it with. But the main point is they are planning a spring offensive, which is supposed to be targeting the land bridge between Crimea and the rest of Russia. And if they're organizing a massive counter-offensive around Bakhmut, that's going to be diverting troops and equipment away from what they would have been using for that offensive. So this basically was what Russia's plan was. They almost pretty much openly said they're just, the whole point of Bakhmut is to create a black hole to pull in Ukrainian troops and equipment. And that is exactly what it's doing. And then judging on how the offensive goes and its staying power, I think the most important thing is its staying power, because Russia has repeatedly withdrawn if they feel they're going to suffer heavy casualties or get encircled. They will withdraw because they don't care about territory. They care about the ratio every single day, this attrition. So depending on how long any sort of gain Ukraine makes with the offensive, if it even happens, that will tell us a lot about their staying power versus Russia. Because the one thing we should never assume is the disposition of troops on either side. We just don't know. We don't know, and so we shouldn't assume that Russia has plenty of troops, or yeah, Ukraine can definitely muster enough men to do this, or assume that they can't. We have to keep our minds open to all possibilities. Keep an eye on that, and in the long term, as I always harp on all the time, the logistics. This is what's going to make or break the conflict. If Russia can keep up this intensity, we already see the West cannot, then this is going to end in Russia's favor. And Alex, thank you so much for having me on.
You're welcome.
It's always great. And I look forward to doing it again.
You're welcome, Brian. And yeah, I'm going to give you a ring after the show here, if you don't mind. If you got 5 minutes, I'll give you a call on the old WeChat. And if we can go to our outro screen and say goodbye to everybody. Thanks for joining us on Let's Talk China. We appreciate it. Take care of yourself. Have yourself a great evening. And we're going to go to the outro right now and see if Gawai's ready for that. I think he is. Take care, everyone.